Hey everybody, Ken here from Whistleberry Arts, and today I am going to do a very quick sort of down and dirty tutorial showing you how to edit this splash photo. So this is the splash photo exactly as it came off camera, and you'll notice of course that the background, this is the diffuser. It was a piece of white fabric that I had back there, and over the time it took to take the photos, it got splashed and it got wet. You know, it created these varying sort of colors and shades and so on. So clearly that's something that we're going to have to fix. Looking at the glass itself, there are other things that we'll also want to fix. So if we enlarge our photo, let's go to 66%. You'll see within these sort of dark areas, there's all kinds of these very small little water bubbles and air bubbles rather that we will want to fix. And so we'll get in there and we'll fix all of those. And then there's some blemishes and things that we will see on the glass, some water droplets, things that we just don't want to see. There are some lines here. I guess these are lines that were perhaps on the outside of the glass, which I didn't notice while I was taking photos. So we're going to take the time to go in there and fix all of these things. So where do we start? The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to kind of brighten this up a little bit. We want to make the whites really stand out because we want this to be a really contrasting image. So here in Camera Raw, we're going to start with our light tools, and we'll start with exposure. So we'll bring our exposure up just a little bit. We don't want to do too much with exposure because we don't want to, lose a lot of the contrasting elements that are in the photo. So if we crank this exposure up really high, we'll blow out those whites, but we lose a lot of the darks as well. So we want to find a nice balance that's going to bring up the whites so it's fairly vibrant, but without compromising all those darks and those tonal grays and things like that. Then we can bring up our contrast. That we can crank up way up high. I'm going to put it at about 95. We'll play with our highlights. And again, this will totally be up to you where you put these settings. This is just me doing this quick edit, based on my photo. Your photo may be different, so you'll eyeball it and figure it out on your own. I'll bring my highlights up a little bit. Didn't do a whole lot, maybe lightened up some of these gray areas down here a little. Let's play with our shadows. If we bring up our shadows too much, again, we lose a lot of the dark areas that we want for this really striking contrast. So I'll bring those shadows down actually, because we really want to bring out these dark areas along the edge of the glass and in the splash. But of course, that brought up a lot of this gray again. But again, we'll take care of that in a few minutes. Play with our whites, which helps with some of those grays, and then our blacks. So that's pretty good right there. And again, your photo is going to be different, and so your levels here will be different. Don't go by these numbers specifically. You're going to eyeball your own shot. We'll move down to color. I want this dye. This is the only color that we have in our photo. So I want it to really pop. So we'll do vibrance. We'll bring up the vibrance a little bit. We could also do saturation, but you don't really want to do too much because if we really bring up this saturation too much, it looks oversaturated. The dye doesn't really look natural. It brings out a lot of these reflections in the glass that we're going to have to go back in and kind of take care of later. So we'll bring up our saturation a little bit, but not a whole lot. So I put my vibrance and my saturation at roughly the same levels. We can go down to effects. We don't want any texture. We can try to bring the texture down. That'll help get rid of some of the little bubbles and things that we want to get rid of later on up in here. Clarity will sharpen things up a little bit, but again, we want to be very, very sparing with this. Dehaze, maybe we'll bring that up just a little. And I wouldn't bother with the vignette this time. We certainly don't want that. And I'm not going to do anything with the grain. One of the things that you may see in some of these grayer areas and these tonal grays is a little bit of noise. So if we zoom into 100%, there might be a little bit of grain in here that we want to get rid of. So by going to detail, we can use the denoise function. This is a nice AI function in Photoshop Raw. If you click denoise, it'll give you a little bit of a preview here. Takes a second, and you can sort of see what the image will look like. So this, you can see here, it says without enhancing, and then if I let go, enhanced, and you'll see that it cleaned up some of the sort of fuzz that you saw in areas like this. Let's look at that again. So without the enhancing, with enhancing. So it helps a little bit. I've got my denoise amount set up to about 95. Click enhance. It'll take a minute to sort of sift through all that information and do the denoise. So click enhance and then just be patient. So I sped through that a little bit, but that did take about a minute. And you'll notice after you use denoise in your Camera Raw, it gives you two versions. It makes a little duplicate here. So if you click on the original, that shows you what it looked like originally. If you click on the duplicate, which is the next one that just popped up, you'll see the difference. It's hard to see here on the video, but there is a subtle difference. Once we have our image denoised and we've got all of our contrast levels the way we want, we're going to go in and we're going to make a few changes here. You can do this in RAW or you could do this in Photoshop, but I like doing this particular tool in RAW, and that is our healing brush tool right here. So you can just click on the healing brush or you can hit B on your keyboard. And we're going to zoom in. So down here, I'm going to go up to 200%. And you'll see that this takes us into these areas here within the black areas. And using my healing brush, I'm going to go in and I'm going to clean up all of these little areas. And I'm going to make my brush a little bigger by hitting the square bracket. The right square bracket makes it larger, left makes it smaller. And then you just go and you hit all these little spots and it will just get rid of those things for you. Now I will warn you, this is a very long and tedious process depending on how long you want to take to make these fixes, and it's not very fun. You can hit some of these areas as little spots, or you can sort of paint over them with a longer brush stroke, but sometimes it'll pick up a little extra information and plop it somewhere you don't want. So take your time and sort of go in there and make sure that you're hitting all the spots that you want to hit. But it does take time, so be patient. It's not the most fun. Maybe throw an episode of The Office or something on in the background. Help occupy your time. When you're ready to move along to another area, go back up to this tool here. Get out of your healing brush tool. Hover over your palette here and then drag across your pad, or if you're using your mouse, of course, you can drag over with your mouse and go into those other areas. Go back to your healing brush tool and just continue as you were. I'm not going to bore you by showing you this whole entire process. It does take a long time. This will probably, depending on how many bubbles and things that you've got going on here, it could take you half an hour, 20 minutes, maybe longer. It depends on how much, you really want to focus on these areas. But they do offer some visual distraction, so it is a good idea to try to clean these things up. I'm going to zoom back out by holding down Command and my minus button on my keyboard, and that'll just tap you back out. And then you can drag it around, and then you can zoom back in and tackle these other areas and continue just doing this process until you feel like you've done everything that you really want to do. And just repeat this process until you're satisfied. But once you're finished and you've made all the changes you want to do, we're going to save this image as a JPEG, move it over into Photoshop, and then we'll put our final touches on here. But to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and click Open. And what that will do is it will close RAW and it'll open it in Photoshop. And now here we are in Photoshop. We're going to zoom in for one. Again, we're going to go into these little gray and black areas where we had our specs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to zoom in because I'm going to show you another way that you can clean up these specs besides using the spot healing brush. So we'll zoom in and we'll go in here, and then we're going to use our paintbrush tool instead of the spot healing brush. So we'll click on that. If it's not in your toolbox, go down to your little dots and you'll find it. And then we're going to pick up the color that you want to fill in. So here it's this dark black color, whatever this color is. Hold down Option and the eyedropper will show up. Click your left click button, and now what you've just done is picked up that color. So this is the exact color that you want is what you just picked up. Up here, make sure that your brush is at its softest edge. So your hardness should be down to 0, and don't worry about the size because we'll fix that in a minute. Now, my brush is too big, so using your left square bracket, we're going to make it smaller, and then we're going to zoom in a little more. And assuming that this color is the same as this color, we're literally just going to paint. And the reason you have that soft edge is because we don't want to sharpen the line of paint and take away from the softness here of our reflections in the glass. And if they do sort of show up a little harsher than we want them to, that's okay, because we can go back and use a tool to fix that as well. So this is a lot faster, although you could use the healing brush tool here in Photoshop as well if you wanted to. Even some of these bigger reflections I'm just going to get rid of, just because I don't want those visual distractions in there. And this will work for these big areas where you don't have anything else that you have to worry about, and you can just take out these little blemishes and fill in these big areas with these solid colors. When you get into these tighter areas, though, you will find that you'll have to make your brush smaller, and when you make the brush smaller, it also sort of sharpens the edge a little bit. And so you get up in here to sort of clean this up, and then suddenly that nice soft edge isn't so nice and soft. It looks like you painted in that area, which of course you did. And you want this edge, so this edge that I just painted, and over here especially, is a lot sharper than down here. And then to fix that, I'm going to go over to my tools, and it's somewhere in your toolbar. You're going to use the blur tool. So I'm going to click the blur tool, and then I'm just going to paint over that area. And I'm just going to soften that up. Make sure that you're at normal mode and you're 100% strength. And you'll do that throughout your entire thing. Go back to your brush. I want to get rid of this great big white ugly line, so I'm just going to paint it in, and I'll continue doing that until all of these areas are covered up the way I want them. Now that won't work in areas like this where you've got the whites and there's a bit of blue in there and so on, and so that's where you're going to go back and use your spot healing brush in Photoshop. So the spot healing brush is really good for this kind of work, but again, it's very, very tedious. So with those big swashes, if you can use your brush tool, it'll really save you a lot of time and frustration. Once you're done, all we have left to really do is our background. And we're going to do that same brush process again with the blacks, only this time we're going to use white. And because there's much less detail that we have to concern ourselves with, we can use a larger edge. But again, make sure that you're at that super soft, zero hardness edge. Pick up the brightest point, so the white is right here. I'm going to pick that up, so click, and you'll notice over here in our color swatch, this is how you can tell. This was our previous color, the background color rather, and then this is our front color. If I wanted to go back and do the black, I would just grab that black again, and you'll see that now our dominant color is this color. But I'm going to use the white. So there's the white, and I'm going to just start painting. Big swatches of paint. And in some areas it'll barely be noticeable because we sort of fixed our brightness areas in those spots. But there are other areas down here, for example, where it'll be very obvious that we're painting in, and that's okay because we'll just make it so seamless that you'd never know. But what you have to be aware of is that with splash photography, you've got all these little splashes and bubbles and things, and you don't necessarily want to get rid of all of those because they sort of tell the story of, you know, the fact that this is water splashing. If you get rid of all of them, you sort of lose the splash effect. So we're going to work around those a little bit. So there's one up here we're going to keep. There's a bunch over here. There's some very soft ones in the background. I'm going to get rid of those. They're very subtle and they don't add much to the photo, so I'm just going to paint over them. There's one here similar to the one up there. I'm going to keep that one, so I'm going to paint through that but not over it. So all I did was make my brush a little smaller so that I didn't accidentally paint over it by accident. And then I'm going to go down here and I'll paint in all these areas. When you get close to the glass, we're going to get really zoomed in and take our time. So let's increase our image by holding down Command or Control and plus, and that zooms us in. We'll move around our canvas so that we can see what we're looking at. And then we're going to paint in here. And if you notice, the edge that we're painting is very, very soft. And that's what we want here because we don't want to sharpen or lose any of these dark edges of the glass. So we're going to erase around the glass, but we're going to hug the glass and almost, but not quite touch the edge of the glass because it will sort of try to get rid of some detail on those edges that we don't want to get rid of. So like I told you before, the smaller the brush, the sharper that edge will appear. So we will go very close along the edge with that softer brush so that we don't compromise the shape of the glass. And we're going to do that for the entire white background. Even areas that look like they don't really need it, take the time to go over it with your brush, because over here, this kind of looks white, but there's actually some gray there. And you don't see it until you start painting your white over top and you realize how not white it actually is. And then if you look inside the glass, you may see that there are things that you want to fix there as well. You could try to do this on the inside, but again, you've got a lot more sort of areas that you are need to be very delicate with, so do this very, very cautiously. But like, this is actually a bit of water that was on the glass. I don't want it. It's a bit distracting, so I'm going to get rid of it by doing this process this way. And that is pretty much it. I'm done. It looks great. And so I'm just going to go up to File. I'm going to save a copy. I'm going to call it Red Dye Splash. Finished. I'm going to save it to my desktop. You can save it wherever you like. I always save it to my desktop. That way I know where it is. I can go and find it. Later on, I'm going to throw it off to my external hard drive. But make sure you save it as a JPEG. Click OK. And I always save mine as a large file, just so that if I ever want to print this and blow it up or whatever, I'm able to do that to a significant degree, and click OK. And that's it. It's going to be on my desktop. It's all finished and edited, and I only used a few very simple tools. Till next time, I'm Ken Turner, and this is Whistleberry Arts.